My humblest apologies about the delay. I'm really sorry about that. I'll just have to swap over my screen so you don't see the rubbish presentation. So hopefully now you've got my full presentation and everyone can hear me. Yep. Am I okay to be heard?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear, Simon.
Brilliant. Right. You would have gone in with many of you would have seen my previous presentation. I'm going to talk to you tonight about a practical guide for shark handling. This very much comes from experience I've had with tagging of blue sharks, especially with PSATing, with the actualities of blue shark fishing, and from stuff I've learned from other people as well, and from scientific literature. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to tell you how, where, or what you should fish for. This is just to talk about my opinion on best practice. And how you handle fish can actually have a big effect, and actually how you fish for them can have a big effect. Introduction, right? First of all, I'm going to do the boring bit about who and why who I am and why this is important. I also want to talk about why sharks are very different to other fish. During the first part of my talk. We are a catch and release fishery, and in my opinion, it gives us an obligation to ensure that the fish return healthy to the water. I then want to talk about why sharks are vulnerable to certain handling techniques and how the way we fish can actually impact survival.
Sorry, I didn't really. Sorry, you should have got me off there earlier.
I will then take questions, and then I'll during the second half.
Did you get in there quicker this time?
Better link.
Sorry, we've got someone in the background with their thing muted. I can't hear properly. But in the second half, I'll concentrate on the best practice documents, and I'll try and summarize these based on some of the scientific studies. Right, boring stuff. Who I am and why you should give a damn about what I say. I talked about this before. I've been an angler since I was 5. There's a brief list of my best fish there. I could include a few others, but that would get really boring. Important stuff is that I have been a crew during the shark season on Mirage out at Plymouth. I've also been a private boat owner. I've also worked as crew for a number of other skippers. I've seen or caught over 4,200 blue sharks since 2005. Bottom bits don't really matter when it comes to fishing, but I do have a degree in marine biology and a PhD in marine ecology. And I'm the honorary biologist for the Shark Angling Club of Great Britain and the Sports Fishing Club of the British Isles, as was said earlier. Right, first of all, I'm going to tell you a story, which is basically how I learned how not to do it. Now, the skipper responsible, I will not mention. It was the first time we ever tried to do a PSAT study, so we were basically trying to put a satellite tag into a fish. And the story goes something like this. Started out going out to sea, nasty wind against tide, easterly 5, maybe a 6, plenty of mackerel. I spent 2.5 hours getting covered in mackerel, chopping them up into small pieces. So I go to the cabin and skipper comes out with his jar. And he said, oh, you've got to add this to your chum. So when I opened it, it fizzes. Now, as working as a microbiologist, if something fizzes, you really ought not to go near it. But I added it to the chum and then promptly spilt the whole damn lot all over the deck. So we now have a skating rink on the back. The skipper then retreats into the cabin and gets a box. And out of this box, which is sloshing with water, he picks out what may loosely be described as a trace. So you can imagine what happens when you leave a shark trace, which was entirely wire, in water for probably a year. What he got out wasn't looking great. There was a hook that was probably quite good in the 1940s and probably actually designed for towing boats rather than anything else, which he then insisted that he put onto both rods as my nicely made by Chris Flower rigs were just not suitable for sharks in his opinion, and circular hooks he just couldn't get his head around. So we bunged these foul-smelling bags over the side, baited a couple of hooks with mackerel, and basically then the skipper retreated into the cabin. It was one of those horrible days where you get that sort of low mist from the east, and it was really snotty, sort of top end of what you want to be out there on. And we sat there for hours and hours, no sign of a shark. Eventually, you can just hear this low humming in the distance. And this low humming was obviously a coaster coming. Not a very good idea to be out there without, with coasters nearby and mist. But anyway, we carried on fishing. The skipper said, "Oh, we really should start to move," which of course was exactly the time that a shark took the hook. Now, there was ensuing panic as, firstly, the skipper had none of the equipment we needed to actually get the fish on board anywhere near. They were all hidden in the cabin. Picked up the rod, brutalised the fish in close. When he got to the side of the boat, it was a reasonable shark, 70, 80 pound. He then made the decision he was going to haul it straight over the gunnels. So he's giving it all his strength, trying to pull this thing, lever it over the gunnels. The fish got about halfway out of the water, by which time his ancient trace parted. He catapulted backwards and smashed his head on the engine blocks, knocking himself cold. At this point, the coaster, which you can see was approximately the size of the one in the picture, was heading straight for us. So I basically had to run into the cabin, turn on the engine, full throttle forward, get out of the downway. We would have been sunk, which shows that small boats really aren't a good idea to play against big boats. Now, that's a pretty rubbish story, and I did learn an awful lot about how not to do it, but I'd summarize the lessons as, first of all, be prepared. Having your stuff hidden away in the cabin, not a great idea. You want stuff to hand. You want to know where it is. You want to be able to access it really quickly. Number two, don't use rubbish gear. That's an obvious one. But at the time, there were a lot of skippers going around with stuff that was, rust is really good because it stops the fish from detecting it and all that sort of stuff. No, doesn't work. There's plenty of people out there who make good gear. You can make your own good gear. There's no excuse. One thing I'd really like to emphasize is that bringing a fish over the gunnels exerts massive forces on the fish. Now, if you can imagine, you've got a wave going this way and that, you've got a skipper pulling up one way and 80 pounder shark the other way, trace parts, skipper knocks himself unconscious. That's a lot of force. The other obvious one is that small boats versus big boats equal technical knockout. You ain't going to win that fight. That's just a general safety thing. So it's a salutary lesson about how not to do things. And hopefully I've actually improved since then. I would say that handling sharks safely is not trivial. Never consider that is. They're a nasty creature to handle if you don't do it properly, and they have a very nasty sharp end. Why sharks are different? Now, I've often been asked by skippers, why the hell should we care about sharks more than we care about other species? Reasonable question? Well, maybe not. Why should we care about a shark more than the mackerel we chop up for chum or the bait we do? And the quote at the top pretty much sums it up. And, it talks about how 300 trout are needed to support one man for a year. The trout, in turn, must consume 19,000 frogs, but it must consume 27 million grasshoppers that then live off 1,000 tons of grass. So basically, as you ascend trophic levels, you lose energy. And there's something called the 10% rule. So for every level you go up, you only get 10% of that energy maintained. So if you go to an apex predator compared to something like a mackerel, you're going to have a lot less of them. They just can't be it. The other very good reason is that, as Georgia very eloquently put last week, was that top-down, a predation control is hugely important for healthy ecosystems. If you wipe out sharks or top predators, you end up with an ecosystem that isn't functioning properly. Other reasons why sharks are different. Now, the graph on the bottom right shows a relatively fast-growing shark in the blue shark, and it shows its growth over time, how long it lives. And the LR and the TR shows the length at maturity and the age of maturity. So they mature at about 5 years, at a length of about something like 75, 80 inches. And the top is a picture of a newborn pup that was actually taken by a friend of mine, Dan Margetts, last year. So sharks, they live for a long time, they mature late, and generally produce few offspring. Now, blue sharks produce more than most. A lot of the big sharks we get around our water produce very few. Now, if you compare it to something like a cod, which produces 4 to 6 million eggs per year, depending on size, but still an awful lot of eggs, a porbeagle shark will only produce 2 to 5 pups and won't produce these necessarily every year, so they can actually skip spawn. The result of this is that, given that all things being equal and the pressure is taken off stocks, the potential for recovery for a fish like a cod or a pollock is far greater than that for a shark. So shark populations, once they're depleted, don't recover quickly. And the ICAT, the recent ICAT Mako stock recovery assessment, actually estimated that even if we stopped all commercial fishing for Makos now, recovery would take 50 years. And, you know, that is just unbelievable, if it happens at all. And of course, they haven't stopped commercial fishing. Right, you should be seeing more of this, but most of this has actually gone from the stage. But we'll see. Right, removal from the water. This is George's slide. Sharks are by their nature fragile, and that includes rays as well. They are cartilaginous fish. Their internal organs are not protected by a rigid skeleton like ours are, but hold loosely in place by connective tissue. So whereas we have ribs protect our lungs, sharks don't have the equivalent, and other organs, things like our spleen. Sharks don't have this. Water pressure does. Out of the water, you can easily tear this connective tissue, and their organs can become crushed just because of the weight of muscular mass on the abdominal organs. You can also easily injure things like the spinal cord, ligaments and tendons. Liver is very, very susceptible to damage. You can hurt them if they're lifted by their head or by their tail. And the pressure on the spine can actually produce irreversible damage that might not be fatal, but might be sublethal and affects their ability to actually reproduce in the future and thrive. I mean, I can give you a really good example. I was on a boat. I was trying to unhook a shark over the gunnels, which I do quite often. I leant down on the side of the deck on the shark bit. Boat went up, my chest went down, I broke 3 ribs. Now, if that had been, I was very lucky. I broke 3 ribs. I had ribs to protect my internal organs. If I hadn't had ribs, I probably would have punctured my spleen or done some really severe damage. As it was, I was in a pretty sore state. But if you can imagine a fish that doesn't have that protection, we need to be careful with them. Right, I'm now going to talk about some considerations of actual how we fish and how we fish can actually increase the survival. I love seeing private boats going out there and catching sharks. There's no way that shark fishing should be an elitist sport. It should be something we should be encouraging young people to get into. We should be, we're seeing less of it. I'm not saying don't go out in your private boat and fish for sharks. That's the last thing I'm saying. I've done it. I'm quite happy. Anyone who wants to go and do it, just consider how you can do it safely. Consider how you fish and how that might impact the sharks. Remember, good skippers are the experts. This is really, really key for this. I'm not just talking good charter skippers. I'm talking about good private boat skippers. These people have done it for years. They're bloody good at it. So talk to them. Don't assume the first time you ever go out in your private boat and catch a shark, you're going to be good at it. There are people out there, with a vast experience. Take advantage of us. Talk to different people. Find out how to do it properly. As I said, post-release survival of sharks caught by anglers should and can be excellent. And the very simple things we can do can make a massive difference to their survival. We are a catch and release fishery. Right, some really simple considerations. My number one would actually be prepared. Now, there are a number of handling guides produced by different people. I've been responsible for a couple and involved slightly in the other. I suggest you have a look at the Shark Angling Club of Great Britain's guide, also the one by the SCBI. There will be links. I'll actually put this up as a PDF. And also the Shark Trust one has some really useful information about how to handle fish. You know, they've done a really nice job on some nice pictures there. It doesn't cover the angling side necessarily as much, but you know, it's well worth a look. Right, basic equipment needed. Pictures top there of the gloves we had. This is actually from Mirage, I think. We have 2 sets of gloves, one for the crew, one for the skipper, marked out left and right. We know where they are. We need them really quickly. Below is a basic list of what the minimum would have, and this is actually designed for using wire with a nylon top shot. So we have T-bars, we have pliers, we have 2 sets of cutters. I have a set of wire cutters. With crimping pliers, it's got another set, a knife, and a safety lanyard. I would also include bolt cutters, because if I can't get the hook out quickly, I'll chop the hook in half. It's really simple. Most important thing, because I am really, really good at chucking stuff over the side, have at least twice what you need. Yeah, anyone who's been on a boat with me, I'm a disaster. Put a T-bar in my hand, I'm going to drop lots over. So don't make my mistakes. That should be, unless you're a lot better than I am. But you know, make sure you've got reserve equipment. There are lots of different ways of doing the same thing, and I've got 4 pictures here that illustrate it. Now, on the left-hand side is Chippy. Now, Chippy has a boat with outboards on it. He catches an awful lot of sharks and does it very well. He uses lighter rods than most people do, as you can see from the pictures, but he gets his fish in pretty quickly. He doesn't scrimp on the line or the gear. He uses sensible stuff. It's well designed for what he's got. Longer rods are really suitable because he's got outboards and he needs to get around the stern of the boat if the fish wants to go there. So he's designed his gear to match the boat, and that's really, really important. Next picture is actually taken from Mirage. It's the typical sort of what you'd imagine as shark angling gear. It's a stand-up stick. It's a sort of 20-30 size reel, might be a 15-20. Decent monofilament on it. We've got one of the little cushion pads on it because this particular angler found it easy. Sort of stuff we give out to people who haven't brought their own gear, and though we have got fixable stuff on the boat. It's ideal for boats that have got, you know, single prop, something like that. Short rods work great, but I do like to have a longer rod, and I'll use a fixable rod on the dropper. Next picture on is actually from Jerry Rogers. Now, Jerry again has an outboard boat. He also fishes for fish that run bloody quick. So his gear is designed purposely for that. That's what he wants to do. So he uses big fixed spools. He uses rods that are up to the task. He likes his fixed spools because if the fish change direction, he can catch up with them really quickly. He's often fishing in shallow water. Again, he's designed his equipment for the fish, the boat, the depth of water, and the species. And the one on the right is the other extent, which is Chris Flower, another picture from Mirage with Roger in the background. Now, Chris is a firm believer of you can't go too heavy, but he loves it. He's incredibly effective at it. And if he wants to do it that way, that's absolutely fine. Now, I can give you an example of how good Chris is. Chris once went 27 runs for 27 fish on his own with 2 over 100 pound. He never lost a fish, he never missed a run, and he never had a fish that came up wrapped. So what he does really, he does it incredibly well. Not everyone's cup of tea, but lots and lots of different ways to do it. But you know, he's an experienced angler. He knows his stuff. He gets the boat, the sharks to the boat safely. I think the important thing is great shark gear doesn't have to cost a fortune. Myself, there are a lot of rods around that are really, really good that aren't that much, don't cost that much. But personally, spend your money on a reel with a decent drag, with a decent track record. How considerations of actually to increase survival. I talked about line and terminal gear. Don't care what you buy, braid or mono, make sure it's a decent quality and of the correct thickness for what you're doing. There are people who use light line very effectively. They tend to be people with an awful lot of experience in it. Personally, I avoid it. The last thing I want to do is leave a fish with line in it, but I'm not going to knock people for what they do. When we first started, it was very hard to get good traces. Now it's not so difficult. There are lots of people, myself included, who sell traces. people like Wally and Alan Story and people like that. You know, I've seen their stuff on the boat. Very good gear, isn't going to fail. If you don't want to make your own, you know, I would definitely consider buying from a decent supplier. Make sure they're a decent supplier. And you know, my list isn't by no means exhaustive. There'll be other very, very good suppliers of gear out there. You know, if I see an angler come on board, I've seen them come on board before with traces they've made themselves, and I won't let them fish with them because they just will not work. I've included a link here to basic crimping instructions. It's available on the Leadertech site. Learn how to crimp properly. You know, crimping something with a pair of pliers doesn't cut it. Get yourself a proper set of crimping pliers. Make sure the crimps fit right. I mean, I actually file mine down a bit. My personal preference for a rig is 5 foot of 49 strand, then with 18 foot of 2 to 2.3 mil mono, with a quality swivel at the top and a snap at the bottom. I also Flemish loop the wire at both ends, the hook end and the other end. The advantage of that is if I want to drop a fish and pull the hook out backwards, I can very easily. I will say there are a lot of people who use wire all the way through. Absolutely fine. I don't do it because just the danger of leaving a lot of wire attached to a fish, but there are people who do it very successfully. I will say if you use mono, check your leader after every fish. If in doubt, chuck it out. And the same with wire. I've seen wire fray. You know, I put it through my hands and my gloves. You know, if you're in doubt about a rig, actually don't use it. One thing I'll say about mono, people think a lot of the bite offs are actually because the fish rolls up the line. Now that is controllable some way by actually how you play fish. But if you actually put a bait stop to stop the bait from blowing up above the wired trace, you'll find that you get very, very few bite offs. And actually, most of the bite offs are due to other sharks actually attacking the mackerel blown up the line when it's on the mono. Since changing to that system, my losses, which weren't great before, have been virtually zero. I've used some of the pictures, quality swivels on the right-hand side, by no means exhaustive. A lot of people do them. You're spending a lot of money to go out on a boat, whether it's a private boat or a charter boat. Buy good stuff. Don't buy rubbish. Hooks, contentious issue with some people, but I would say whatever you do, as Dr. Georgia Jones told you, avoid gut hooking. Gut hooking is very often lethal to the sharks. Now you can use circles and jays to ensure mouth hooking. Myself, I prefer circles. I crush the barb. There's by no means exhausted list of pictures of circles from the right hand side. My own preference are inline circles, followed by inline circles and then inline circles. I've learned off other skippers that I can use a lot smaller circles very successfully. Thank you, Chippy, for that one, which is something that's produced advantages with removing the hooks. The other thing I would say, and a friend of mine does it very well with other shaped hooks, is instant hookup. So rather than actually have your ratchet scream off, you actually have drag on it, tie the rod down. Once the shark's running, you set it. I use that particularly on the dropper because I've got a really nice angle on it and it works really well for me. I would say floats. Don't use balloons. Not only my personal preference. I mean, I don't know if it's just a Plymouth thing, but gulls really like balloons. And watching them peck and peck, and you know what's going to happen. Eventually, they're going to burst. So gulls like balloons. The environment doesn't. You know, there's a lot of thing about helium balloons. Same thing, in my opinion, for these sort of things. Don't use them. I have a preference for tall floats, and there's a very good reason for that. Is that I watch the float at all times. On a flat, calm day, you can actually see before, a bit like a drop shot, the dropper shot used with freshwater fishing. You know, you can actually see when the float lies flat or stops behaving, you pretty much know there's a fish peeing around with it. I use quick release floats. You know, I've made mine. Mike Wallace sells brilliant ones. I think Alan Story does. I'm not telling you to use one of ours. You know, make your own if you like. Do whatever you like. Just giving you an example of the sort of floats I use. The other, I don't know if I've covered this in the next slide. Is probably it's most noticeable on calm days that you gut hook sharks on circles, and you don't true gut hook. you actually hook them in the back of the throat, unlike with jays, which will gut hook. Now, they'll stay in there and they're a pain to get out and you have to leave them behind. But really leads on to what I'm saying in some of this stuff is actually watch at all times. I've got 3 things here, but so I suggest about actually, how we should prepare for angling. A, I've talked about before, be prepared. So have all your equipment to hand, and I mean including your camera equipment. You don't want to be scaffling around for stuff. You ought to know where it is. Everyone should know what it is. Everyone on board the boat should know what to do. A good charter skipper will tell you, will give you precise roles. But if you're on a private boat and you've got more than one of you, make sure they know what's going to happen before a run happens. It's really important because panicking just doesn't work. I'm probably, people who fish with me know I spend most of my time looking at floats. I normally know when there's a shark in the slick a long time before there's a run. So I'd say watch, don't just go to the cabin, go to sleep. You enjoy yourself more, you'll see much more wildlife. As my rule, I've never been an advocate of set the hook on the second run. As soon as that fish is taking line steadily, set the hook. Keys to playing them, which is really important to avoid rat fish. Learn to pump fish properly and react quickly if the fish changes direction. If a fish tail wraps, it'll stop moving around, it'll come back in a straight line, and you can see them doing it on the rod top. The rod top will start to vibrate. I would say if you've got a tail wrap fish, get the fish as quickly to the boat as humanly possible. I mean, if you're fishing for a big fish like a mako or a thresh or a porgy, and you have this situation and you're doing short drifts, there is an option to actually chase the fish. With blues, it's not so simple. Blues aren't quite so susceptible as they haven't got, whereas poor beagles and threshers are obligate ram ventilators. They need to be going forward to actually breathe. Blues aren't. You often see blues just lying there still on the surface. They can pump water to some extent over their gills. But, just important things to think of when you're angling. Right, that for me is half time and questions.
Thank you very much, Simon. So just to the audience, please use the meeting chat box if you want to submit any questions. We've had one through so far from Kevin Woodcock, and he asks, would you recommend monofilament line over braid, and if so, why?
I would say use one or the other. They don't mix. If you've got one person with braid and braid goes across the mono, it'll cut it. If I use braid, I normally have a top shot in it. I just like the stretch, but I'm sure other people do it differently. The other thing is it's good, as I said, I haven't got a preference. I've done both, but I just don't like mixing them. There are arguments for both. They used to use the old Dacron that used to float, and that had certain advantages. But yeah, I say just don't, mixing them doesn't work for me. You've got to be really, really quick to make sure when they cross, they'll just cut through, and then you've lost a fish, a float, a trace. Not a great idea.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Tomas, and my apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly. And they ask, how do you stop fishtail wrapping?
One of the ways you mostly see it is from people who drop the rod too soon. So when you're pumping, rather than actually start having pressure when they drop the rod, they're actually just dropping it and then winding, and they're giving them slack line. And blues love wrapping, and as soon as you do that, they will wrap. I mean, blues tend to wrap on a leader anyway at the side of the boat. And there's the other thing I found with them is if you set too much drag with a blue and just stop it dead, its first reaction is to roll up the line. So let them run if they want to run. But definitely the biggest, so people like Chris Flower, who are really good anglers, very rarely wrap fish, except on really rough days when you're tossing all over the place and it's really hard. It's really noticeable with people who haven't been out a lot. With blues, they will tend to wrap more fish than people who, experienced anglers. Stopping them wrapping next to the boat, that's a whole different issue. You basically just have to unwrap them as they do it. A blue shark will do anything it could possibly can to be awkward. Any potential taggers out there, you'll probably know what I'm talking about.
Thanks, Simon. So the next question is from Tim. and he asks, hi Simon, I've not got a door on my boat, but have been advised to make a lasso with cabina and hose pipe. What are your thoughts on this, and does this go around and behind the pectorals?
I stay away from lassos at all costs. I come into that a little bit in the second half of the talk about how to bring a boat, how to bring a fish on board. I mean, there are options for things like slings, which I've seen a couple of skippers use. There are also things like mesh ramps that you can use to avoid those sort of hard edges. I mean, my preference is unhooking the water, but I'm not going to lecture people about it. I will talk about that a bit more. Oh yeah, any sort of lasso, don't think it's a great idea. Great,
thank you. So the next one is from a user that identifies themselves as Shark Handling, and they ask, hi, is it just boat handling? Just started fishing for tope off the rocks and beaches. Any tips for these?
Wow, that's actually a really difficult one. It's not something I do a lot of. I would probably, if you can make it work. I mean, I have netted big sharks before. It doesn't work great. It's probably not practical from the rocks. Just try and avoid actually, you know, try to avoid contact with things like tope and sharp edges. Unhooking mats, things like that. You know, there's plenty of stuff around in the catfish world that will suit. You know, as to the actually going back to the previous question, I've seen people adapt catfish hoists and things like that to actually bring fish on board. But yeah, I've been really careful when you've got a fish on the rocks. You just try, because they'll thrash about, hard edges, and sharks don't mix.
Great, thank you. The next one's from Rick, and he says, so what are the best floats to use called? Are they the ones that run up the lines until they are close to the boat?
Oh, my preference is quick release floats, but they are by no means the answer. A friend of mine who's very successful uses old bits of those kiddies floaty noodles cut up with a tube down the middle. I don't like stop knots because they tend to move. I originally used the fantastic Ready Rigs floats produced by Leadertech. I've sort of come up with adaptations for various reasons. I like floats that run down the line, so I'm effectively playing the fish, not the float. As I say, I have an aversion to stop knots, but I do mark my line. That's the one thing I'd say. I tend to use, when I'm fishing for blues and I've got 4 rods, I've got 4 different color lines out because it helps me when fish cross. But I mark each line at 10-foot intervals, so I can reset really, really easily.
Great. Well, thank you. So that's the first half questions done. Please do keep those coming through, and over to you, Simon, for the second half.
Right, thank you very much. Right, so I covered the first bit, which is actually the angling part of it. This is probably the bit more controversial about best practice for handling. Now, this is based. A lot of stuff was based on the study I did. I was involved with very early on, where we found that hauling fish over the gunnels had a high mortality rate for blues. It wasn't published, but because it was a trial study. But to be honest, it shocked me so much. I thought, my God, if we kill that many fish, I just won't do it. We then discovered that by handling them in a different way, we could actually get fantastic survival for sharks. So, this was based on me hauling fish over a gunnel. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to lecture people about how they do stuff. I'm just going to say, what the best advice based on scientific advice is for handling sharks. I'm going to offer you some advice for releasing fish in the water, which is how we do it. I'm going to talk a bit about, if you do have to bring a fish on deck for any reason, how you can do it safely. And the skippers who do it, do it occasionally and do it according to guidelines, and I'd say, well done. I'm also going to talk about hook removal, when to, and also most importantly, when not to. And then at the end, I'm just going to have a summary. Right, I've put this sort of red, green, orange, amber, red, just to emphasize the difference in survival, in opinion, my preferences for how to handle sharks. Right, so first of all, I'll start at release at the side of the boat. First of all, it minimizes the stress to the fish. They're not out of the water. They've got a constant supply of water running over them. their stress levels are going to be less than if we try and haul them on board and take them out of water for a period of time. There's a low chance of damage to the internal organs. You're not banging them against a row. You're not banging them against the deck. There's known to be a high survival rate. And in my opinion, for things like big threshers and big poor beagles, it is the only option. I don't think there is actually an excuse for bringing a big shark like that on board. You know, I can't think of a reason why you would do it, or even how you could do it. I would say the one downside of actually releasing in the water, especially on a high gunnelled boat, is that hook removal can be really hard. And I can offer you some advice on that. And if you look at the bottom right there, there is 100 odd plus shark being released by Dave on Mirage using an ARC dehooker. I've noticed that some of the people in the UK, some manufacturers and some tackle sellers have started to produce similar things. Brilliant. We paid a fortune for that thing from the States. Really glad to see them in the UK. Really useful bit of kit. But they only work on big sharks. My personal limit for T-barring a shark at the side of the boat is about 70, 80 pounds. I'm sure other people can do better, but after you've caught a number of sharks at the end of the season, as any charter skipper or a private boat owner who does a lot will know, your shoulders are no longer functioning properly. The next category is bringing fish aboard via a door, or if you can make it work, via a sling. Now, you will increase the stress on the fish being out of water. There's no way to avoid that. It may not be fatal, but you will increase the amount of stress. I will say it is very difficult to do safely. There's some skippers who do it brilliantly. It takes a lot of practice, but it has fantastic survival rates if it's done properly. Now, don't assume that you can do it properly without, it's not that easy. But, I've seen some fantastic examples of how to handle fish. There's some skippers who are well known for it. It's not the way I prefer to go. I prefer to put all my fish back at the side of the boat, but we don't have a door. We've tried other methods and I just can't make it work on a consistent basis. Blue sharks get their teeth into a lot of things and then they just become a pain in the backside. And so one of the real big advantages is you can get accurate length girth measurements, and which is very important for things like trophies that interest you, but also for things like scientific data. I mean, the one thing I will say is that myself and Georgia and others are working in ways of getting accurate data, length girth data from fish in the water, from photographs. It's something I've done in the past, but it takes me quite a lot of effort. But if we could produce an app or something that did it from a photograph, with an object of known size, that would be hugely helpful. I would say that one of the big advantages of bringing them on board, it's very easy to remove the hook. It's much easier than at the side of the boat. Hauling over the gunnels, right? First of all, very high probability of damaging internal organs. In my experience, 50% of the fish we did died, and they didn't die instantly. They swam off all very nicely, and they died within 4 days. Now, to me, that's not catch and release fishing. If I knew that all shark survival was like that, I would never fish for a shark again. You've also got the increased stress because the fish is out of the water. As I said before, low survival rates. To be honest, after you've added that up, it doesn't really matter about whether you get your hook back or not. To me, it's a total no-brainer. A word on hook removal. Now, I've seen some very interesting pictures of people trying to take hooks out via gills and things like that. First of all, most of us are neither surgeons nor vets. And even if we were, I'd take that probably is somebody here tonight who is a vet. I very much doubt they would like to operate on an animal on a boat that's tipping and turning. So please don't try to be a vet. Going out through the gills to me is like trying to do lung surgery on somebody when you don't know what you're doing and you're on a boat. Not a good idea. Gills are hugely vascular. If you damage them, the outcome for that fish is going to be poor. So my advice is, if you can't remove the hook easily, cut the trace as close as possible. You'd be amazed how quickly on barbless circles or barbless hooks they'll drop them. Or if you can, cut the hook in half with a bolt cutter. There's a really obvious one here, which is don't use stainless steel hooks, use stuff that rot out. yeah, I think that's probably pretty much the standard practice. But please, yeah, you are not surgeons, and don't try to be. Releasing fish at the side of the boat, just some advice. Again, we go back to preparation. The skipper and the crew need access to the fish. Now, with myself and Dave, it's pretty, people will know we have assigned roles. We swap them over to our shoulders just disintegrate. But the other people on the boat should know what their role is. So if it's being out of the way or if it's being taken camera footage, please listen to whoever happens to be the skipper in charge. If you're a private boat, you're the skipper, you take charge. Yeah, it's the way I go for it. Again, know where everything is. Everything needs to be somewhere you can reach it. Doesn't always work, you know. Sometimes I've looked around and everything's on the bloody floor. So sometimes I don't practice what I preach. Dave will tell you sometimes I put things back in the wrong place, so I'm not perfect. One of the things that's really important, and you'll get the experience of this, you never try to remove a hook from a fish whilst it's still green. After a while, you know when a fish has had its last effective run. You'll feel it on the leader if you're the leader man. You'll tend to see as they start to come up, they start to show a bit more belly. I don't mean wear a fish out completely, but the last thing you want is a very active large fish at the side of the boat that is just going to bash itself on the side of the boat, create mayhem. You know, I'm not talking about wearing fish out. I'm just saying, you know, really, really green fish. We tried to do one once. We were going to tag it. It was a fish of about 130, 140 pounds. Came in 2 minutes. The scientists wanted to bring it on board. We said, look, this fish is just going to go banzai in a minute. And oh no, we want to put a tag in it. So we eventually, damn thing didn't want to do anything. So we just had to touch it with a gaff, at which case it was another 45 minutes before we saw it again. But the thing is to remember there, if we tried to bring that fish on board, it would have smashed itself and the boat to pieces. Do not use a gaff. That's a pretty obvious one. Tailors look nice, but you're in danger of damaging ligaments and things like that. So get your fish. I use the leader to get close to the boat. I would say with dehooking tools, whichever one you're going to use, practice first. I mean, you know, if you want to practice at home on a bit of the old stuff tattooists try with, know how to use them. So, you know, things like T-bars are relatively easy. The pigtail dehookers can take a little bit of practice, especially when they're on a pole. The little fella looking at you at the bottom was, I think, 170 pounder that Chris had, which I believe we had to cut the trace because the hook was just far enough back, so we weren't actually going to be able to get it. But you know, that's another thing. But yeah, please be, you know, these things are very important when you've got a fish at the side of the boat. You're measuring water. We've all done it. Some of the boats I know of actually have tape measures on the side of the boat, on the side of their hulls. They actually have them marked out there when they take the boat out of the water. Easy enough. You can do it. You can do it. Mark and measure to get a rough one. Clubs like the Shark Angling Club now are taking this sort of evidence with signed stuff from the skippers for some of their trophies. I very much encourage you to do it. As I say, you can get a measurement from a photo if you have something of a known size and the fish in the same plane to avoid the parallax effect. The one above there, we actually got some really good footage of it. Top right-hand corner, it was the biggest blue I've ever seen. It was a he, and after I knocked a few inches off either end, he came out at 215 pounds. But we did that from a photograph. We also took a length at the side of the boat. Have your camera equipment ready for use. You know, I would say that some of the GoPro footage I've seen of fish in the water at the side of the boat is a lot better than a lot of the pictures you see of fish on board. We have fantastic technology available to us. If you want to take a photograph, just be ready to do it, because we want to release these fish as quickly as we possibly can. If a fish is wrapped, make sure you cut away the gear before removing the hook. So, but comes with that, make sure you've actually got a hand on the end where the hook actually is. As I say, my limit for a T-bar from a high gunnelled boat is about 70 pounds. Now, I know other skippers can do 100 pounders. Good luck to them. My shoulders won't take it. said the pigtail dehookers work brilliantly on big fish. You won't get them to work on pups. As I said, the one in the bottom right hand corner, I cut the trace. I think I did because the hook was just that far back, but quite often I just chop the hook in half using bolt cutters. Right, these are talking to. I'm talking to other skippers about these. The porgy at the bottom is actually one about 70 that we had. The picture at the top is actually from Spencer, from the Isle of Wight, and there's a beautiful thresher shark at the side of the boat. Talking to the people who fish for these fish, they actively encourage ventilating of the fish, so they swim them like a tuna. Remember, these fish require water going over their gills, so they actually recover them. Now, I don't know a lot about threshers, but I have spoken to people who do, and they say that this is their advice for doing it. There is probably an argument for also doing that with porbeagles. There are two things you never do. Don't hold them by the gills. You ain't going to do them any good, as I said before. Don't hold by the tail. You can affect their ligaments and make them less able to swim well. And really, really important, never go near the sharp end. I hear these stories. I'm lucky I've never been bitten by one. I don't know if I'm lucky I'd just take precautions, but I did have a small one land on my shoulder once when I went to T-bar it and was being a bit cocky, and it bounced off my shoulder teeth first. I was very lucky, but it reminded me that stay away from the shark and the sharp end of the shark. Boarding a fish, I would say, is difficult. It is best avoided unless you're an expert. I mean, here are two different sling methods. One's used, I believe, is a great white there. There's a picture of them, how they do it scientifically. Now, you might do that away on a charter boat. The one at the bottom is probably a more practical thing, and I know several skippers who actually do it with high gunnels. Boarding a fish is a lot easier if you've got a door. It's still not easy, but learn from skippers who do. You can use things like the rolling of the boat and that sort of thing to actually time getting the fish on board. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. I've been over it enough. Don't just haul the fish over the gunnels by a trace. You're really going to do it some damage. Avoid any sharp edges. Again, don't pull by trace. And yet again, I'm going to tell you, don't get bitten.
I'm listening to a talk at the moment, but I'll pass you to Mum.
Yeah, one in the background. Okay. Boarding a fish without a door, and I would say the only time you want to do this is in exceptional circumstances. And by exceptional circumstances, I mean if the fish is wrapped and it's going to die, unless you actually bring it on board, or you use something like a hoist, something like that, as I talked before. Now, here's the advice: if possible, bring the shark aboard horizontally, and believe me, that's not easy. It doesn't damage the ligaments as much, or the tendons, or the organs. The advice for small sharks is very much handle with both hands, one on the dorsal pectoral or neck, and by neck I mean between the gills and the dorsal fin, and the other holding the tail or supporting the body, which is my favorite one to do. I don't really like holding the tail. Medium to large sharks, you need at least 2 people. Some of the big blues in this country, you probably need 4. So work your way out to do that one. I'd have a person holding the head, dorsal fin and or pec, and the other one holding very lightly the tail while supporting the body. Make sure that the belly and the teeth always face away from the handlers. Back again, don't haul over the gunnels. Handling a fish on deck, and I'm happy to see a picture of Chris Avery on board there. He chooses to ventilate fish. That's a very good example of how a fish is safely looked after on board. The deck's wet. He actually's got a special part of the deck he uses for it. Uses lots of water and ventilates it. And very important is that if you want to go barefoot on a deck on a hot day, you will burn your feet. If a shark does it, they'll burn themselves, and you can see it. I've seen people holding up pictures of sharks with dull sides to them. That shark has been burnt. That's not a great idea. I mean, a lot of the Loo lads who do it, and they're very good at doing it, they use a damp mat. So they'll bring the fish through the door straight onto a mat, which they then would have wetted. Make sure at all times the fish is kept wet. This is really, really important, especially on hot days. My preference always was was actually to put a cloth over the eyes. It does seem to calm them down a little bit. By not forcefully restraining, I mean, you know, sharks will wriggle around and do whatever. Hold them by the head midsection, above the tail, but again, not forcefully. Just make sure, again, that the belly and the teeth face away from you. You really don't want to get bitten. Blue sharks, as anyone will know, will turn on their own body and bite you from any angle, but just make sure it doesn't happen. Don't touch the snout. There's a lot of awfully important organs there. Try not to damage them. They rely on them to feed. Most importantly, I would say, learn from skippers, be it from private boats or preferably a charter boat who's done it hundreds or maybe thousands of times. Learn how they do it. You know, they know their stuff. A lot of these lads have been doing tagging studies for years, and you know, the evidence from their returns is they do it very well. Be quick. And again, that goes back to being prepared. If you want to get photographs, there is an argument for if the fish is out of the water for more than 2 minutes that you ventilate with a, and I emphasize, low pressure hose, as Chris has done in the picture there. What you don't want to be using is, you know, some of these ridiculously powerful things that some of the big boats have. You know, that's just not going to work. My preference for photographing fish is to kneel by fish. You know, just kneel behind the fish, hold it very lightly, get a photograph, put them back as quickly as you can. There are ways of holding these fish, which we've mentioned before, but leave it to the professionals. You know, don't try it yourself. You need multiple people to hold a big fish, and getting them up there is a real strain. I mean, again, it's not my recommendation. I'm just saying it because if you do have to bring one on board, this is what you should do. And don't just chuck back over the gunnels or anything like that. Make sure they go back carefully. Let them, you know, just let them go head first, or just slip them back in the water or something. It has to be better for them. Right, I really want to summarize what I was talking about. And the main thing I want to emphasize here is that if we do this properly, catch and release shark fishing results in minimal harm to the fish. And that's fantastic. I mean, you know, when the scientists have done the tagging and they handle fish really, really carefully, the results are very, very impressive. Very simple things we can do can make a huge difference to survival, but making sure we don't gut hook fish, it makes a 50% difference to survival rates. Now, circles don't true gut hook, but if you're fishing with jays, just don't gut hook fish. You know, set for instant strike. You've got to miss one. It's better than a dead fish. I mean, you know, I'm talking about blues, but the population of some of these other big sharks in the UK, even though we catch them, are nowhere near as big as blue shark populations. You know, by killing a few fish, you make a massive difference. Yeah. Read the handling guides. I know we don't like doing it, but look through them, scan through them at least, try and take some stuff out of it. In my opinion, and a lot of other skippers as well, releasing in the water is optimal. Even the skippers who bring fish out will release 80–90% of their fish in the water. And again, they're bloody skilled at it. Most importantly, you are not a surgeon. If you can't easily remove the hook, cut it off, chop it in half. Follow the guide. If you must bring board fish, do it safely to the fish and to yourself. And back again, learn from the experts. The best skippers that I know care a lot about their fish. It's their future, and these people care passionately about putting these fish back safely. And that I'm probably happy for you to say is the end of my talk. Questions, full-time and the Welsh Rugby Ball.
Thank you, Simon. So we've just had one through. So to the audience, please do keep those coming through. So the first one's from Alan, and he asks, do you agree that for poor beagles and threshers, the overall or fork length is not a reliable indication of weight, since they can vary greatly in girth for a given length?
I would say, to be honest, I think we need to get away from our obsession with weight. There are very good correlations between length and age. Girth and weight depends on what a fish has been eating, how big its liver is. I mean, I'll give you an example. George Yollop's 500-pound mako, as we were getting to the side of the boat, coughed up a 45-pound conger eel. Now, if it hadn't coughed up the 45 conger eel, it would have been pound conger eel. It would have been £545. Does it really matter? But yeah, I would say that NOAA have done some very good stuff on length, on tail length stuff. There is a variation with it in it, which is obvious. I'd say the formula we use at the moment, the length times girth squared divided by 800, isn't a good reflection of shark weight anyway. It was designed for other species. There is one that was done for tope, I believe, and that will probably be a better one to use for sharks like blues. It's much more difficult to answer that question for things like poor beagles and threshers. There are things like reasonably reliable fork length to tail length conversions and backwards, but as I say, weight is subject to so many variables. I think it's probably time we go away from it as how to think, would be my half-assed answer at that.
Great, thank you. So John McMaster has just sent through a question, and he asks, would it be an idea to add a list of the potential injuries a shark can sustain if its liver is squashed, a hand is inserted into its gills, etc., to the handling guides, as it's clear that just because it swims away that it's no guarantee it won't die or perhaps have ongoing health issues for the rest of its life?
I think it should definitely be explained. I think Georgia did a fantastic job of explaining it last time, and she is more that sort of biologist than I am. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very important to realise that just because a fish swims off, it doesn't mean it's going to be okay. All the tagging studies show that. I mean, they include post-release mortality up to a week or more. I think it might be up to 12 days. Most sharks don't die instantly. They'll show normal behaviour for a while, then they'll show adverse behaviour, and then they will die. So yeah, definitely, if we can actually change the way people do these sort of things, I think it's hugely important. And adding it to the handling guides, great.
Great, thanks, Simon. We haven't had any further questions, so I don't know if there's any wrapping up comments you want to say, just to give people a couple more minutes to put any in the chat box if they have any. If not, over to you.
No, sure. I mean, if you want to ask me questions, I'm not judging people on how they fish or whatever they do. If you want to talk to me, you can get me on my email address. I think, it's probably around there. If not, I can put it up somewhere. If you want to discuss this, I'm more than happy to do so. It's about making what we do better. In my opinion, we are a catch and release fishery. If you want to catch and fish and eat it, that's fine. That's a different matter entirely. Do it humanely, eat it. I haven't got a problem with that. We all do it. We all eat fish. Well, most of us do. I do included. But my opinion is that for a catch and release fishery, we have a responsibility, especially to some of these species that that have at times. Blue sharks, when I first started, they were, you didn't find many of them. A lot of people don't remember back to the early 2000s when, there were terrible years. The number of fish reaching our shore was very low, and by killing just a few fish, you made a huge difference to what was around. And the same applies to species that are returning to our waters, and the more unusual fish like threshers and that sort of thing. And poor beagles, we have a responsibility to make sure those fish go back safely.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, a couple more questions have gone through. So the one is from Tim, and he asks, what length should a sling be ideally?
The maximum length of your fish plus a couple of foot. So if you're going to get 9-10 foot blues, you want, I think I use sort of a 9 foot, something like that. I have seen those big catfish slings, the ones they sell, but yeah, you can get away with the tail at either end. My favourite ones for sharks, I did try catfish slings, but blues have got a nasty habit of biting onto anything. I tend to prefer sort of a mesh bottom or something like that. I know there was a design some of the skippers came up with. I can dig it out for people. But yeah, I tried to make it almost as long as the sharks you catch anyway.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Alan, and he asks, do you prefer bridle rigged whole dead baits or other methods?
I use quite a lot of different methods. I mean, I use I don't use strict bridle rigging. I actually use a maggot clip for use for freshwater fishing as on a sort of a hair rig sometimes, and it lets me get away with smaller circles, which has several advantages. The only disadvantage with that is that I can't actually pull it out backwards as easily, and though I can pull it out, the rig out backwards. Mostly for blues, I will use hook through the mouth. There are occasions where you have to play around with things to get them to take properly. As I say, I haven't used bridle rigs as such. I've seen people do it and they work well, but I have come up with sort of the maggot clip variation. And I think there's probably, you know, that they're not quite perfect. You could probably make a bit more of a secure one that would do the job very well.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Bob, and he asked, do you think J hooks should be reserved for non-catch and release species?
No, I mean, J hooks don't, circle hooks don't work for all fish. I would say that. I think things like conger, I cannot for the life of me make them work, and yet I return them. I would say I struggle to find a reason to use a J hook for a shark. But I know some skippers disagree with me. Some skippers swear they're the devil's creation. I mean, I've been sold on them ever since. I've tried lots of different makes and designs. I've listened to other people. I've changed what I use. My favourite still are, you know, I've gone smaller, are circle hooks with the barbs crushed. But yeah, I question their use in shark fishing.
Thank you. So the last question of the evening, unless any more come through, is from Rick. And he asks, are circle hooks more likely to be hooked in the mouth rather than straight hooks that are swallowed? Yeah.
Circle hooks are designed to catch in the middle, in the corner of the mouth. They do that extremely effectively. I have known people who've worked very well with J hooks. They can hook fish in the mouth, but it's normally an instant strike setup. And that doesn't work very well on calm days when the fish go run at you. The incidence of a circle hook deep actually gut hooking is very rare. The question, I would like to find a way of getting the perfect circle hook for sharks. So I'd like to avoid them getting just caught in the very back of the throat. They just catch the little ridge there. They're not properly hooked. They can't be. They can't like turn around on themselves, but they're firm enough in there so I can't get them out easily. So I don't think the perfect hook exists. But even when there were some studies done on longlining, and even when they had to leave the circle hook in because they couldn't easily get it out, the survival rate was still greater for circles than it was for J hooks. So J hooks properly gut hook, circle hooks don't.
Great, thank you. So we've had one more through from Tom, and he asks, what size circle hooks would you recommend?
Oh, trouble is everyone's manufactured circle hooks is different. I mean, I used to use the original mustard ones I used were in 16-0s, which were far too big. The 15-0s I used for years, but recently talking to Chippy, he uses much smaller hooks very effectively. And when I tried it, they worked very well. So we're talking about the fine wire wide gate mustards in 10-0s. And I'm not selling mustards here. I'm not sponsored by them of anyone. You know, other people make great hooks. And also things like the eagle claws in 10-0s. So I have gone a lot smaller and finer wire than I ever used to on blues. Now it's a very different question for Paul Beagles and for threshers. And though I gather threshers have small mouths, I never caught one, so I can't pass you. So I would say if you want to know the ideal hook to catch a big Paul Beagle or a big thresher, ask one of the skippers who actually does it regularly. But yeah, I would say I've gone a lot smaller on circles than I ever used to do. But yeah, have a look at the mustard fine wires in the 10-0s.
Great, thank you. A couple more. Next one's from Gwyn, and they ask, do barbed hooks cause more damage than barbless, or are micro barbed best?
I prefer crush barbed, though Mustard have brought out a barbless hook to their credit. I find the bait stays on easier with a crush barb. Now my crush barbs, the pliers I use, there isn't much of a bump there, and just make sure you haven't got anything going out. They do come out a lot easier. The other way, if you're going to go completely barbless, is just put something like put your mackerel on. You can actually just tie it on with wire, which is another technique to stop the mackerel going up the line. We use telephone wire, or just use a bait stop. So in front of, after you put your mackerel on, you can actually just put a tiny tab of an elastic band or something, and that will stop the mackerel falling off.
Great, thank you. Another question from Alan, and he asks, single or multi-strand wire for biting length. I use 7x14 rather than 7x7.
Yeah, never go near single strand in my opinion. The devil's wire, the only time I tried it, it cut through my hand, so I don't go anywhere near it. I know why people do use single strand. I don't like it for what I do. There may be some applications. I like the idea of the more stranded wire. It's been sold on me that it breaks easier, but I find it hard to believe it would. 7x7 is what I use, but yeah, I think the 7x14 would do a job. You can go, I mean, originally we used to use 400 and AFW was my favorite. And again, I'm not selling wire. I buy wire from other people like Leadertech and also from some of the cheap suppliers. I camouflage it myself. But yeah, I stay away from single strand. I hate the stuff. Absolutely hate it with a passion.
Thanks, Simon. So we've had an emailed question in from an attendee, and while the focus this evening is on boat fishing, could you give your thoughts on shark fishing from the shoreline, please?
I can certainly give you thoughts on things like smooth hand and stuff like that, which again, I would look at things like the handling guide by the Shark Trust for how to pick the fish up properly. The evidence is that smooth hands are, because their size, are reasonably resilient. There's a tagging study going on at the moment, so maybe we'll find out a bit more. If you're talking about the big sharks that are caught in Africa, in the southern Africa, I don't really have a lot of experience on it. I know there's a lot more tope angling that goes on in the UK, and it's often from rocky grounds. Now, the people quite entitled to fish for what they like, and it must be fantastic fun to cook them. I would just say think about how you can handle them safely, and the same guidelines would, avoid sharp edges, handle them correctly. I know a lot of these boys spend a lot of, often fish circle hooks and stuff like that anyway. It's pretty general practice now, but really think about how you're handling a fish. Would always be my advice. I could see fishing from a rock it being exceedingly difficult to get a tope onto the rocks. I'm presuming these boys have a way of doing it. I'm not privy to that, I'm afraid.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Simon, for your time and your presentation this evening. Okay, 1 second. We've just had one more question through. If you gut hook a shark and it died on deck, what would you do with it?
I might as well eat it. My honest history, if I killed a fish, I spoke to a very well-known skipper who was passionate about shark release, but he said if he ever got a fish on board that he knew was going to die, rather than let it suffer, he would actually take it home. Now, it doesn't apply to restricted species, and I don't by any means encourage this, but yeah, I mean, I would be devastated if I did it. I'm upset enough when I have to release a fish, and I think it's slightly less than optimal. But things like what would I do? I'd be really upset. Would be my first thing. It's very rare for a fish to actually die on deck. I have seen it happen, but yeah, I mean, if it's something that's allowed and you can make use of it, then this may not be the PC answer. And maybe you got to, but not for protected species. I mean, when you're talking about fish that are protected, then just don't go there. But then again, as I said, there isn't really a good excuse for bringing a poor beagler or a thresher on board.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Simon, for your time and for your presentation this evening. I'm going to hand back to Stuart in a moment, but just to let everyone know that this presentation, if you missed the beginning due to technical difficulties, will be available on YouTube. And if there's an appetite among the audience for shore fishing for sharks as a theme for a future forum, please do let us know. So over to you, Stuart. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah, and thank you, Simon, for an absolutely fantastic and presentation, hugely informative, hugely stimulating. and some great questions from the audience. So thanks a lot, Simon. And apologies to everybody for the technical difficulties at the beginning, but I think we got a good audience, and I think we had a really good discussion there. As Hannah has just mentioned, and we have filmed this.